Hello, it's Mark Hill from Greenleaves here. So today I'm considering what chaos would result if we ended up with an extension to Article 50 or an abrogation of Article 50. Now at the moment we're European citizens, and because we're European citizens we have the right to vote in European elections, and it's held as a core issue within European law. It's not something that's abrogated very easily. We remain European citizens until the 29th of March if everything else remains equal. On the 30th of March we are no longer European citizens, and therefore we no longer have the right to vote in a European election. However, the intriguing point is, until the 29th of March we are European citizens. And because we're European citizens, we not only have the right to vote in European elections, we also have the right to campaign in them. We have the right, for example, to list a political party for an election in our own country, for the European Parliament. We even have the right to participate in another country's European elections. And that may sound a little odd, but it is being done at the moment by Yanis Varoufakis, who is standing for a new list party that is standing in several countries in the EU. He himself is standing in Germany, even though he is of course Greek, to try and secure the position of German member of the European Parliament on behalf of his new cross-national list party. Now, we have the right, therefore, to consider now what the consequences would be of an extension to Article 50, and indeed what our rights are, both now and in the event that there is such an extension, or an abrogation of Article 50, which means that we'd still end up having the rights of a European citizen. Well, we would have the right to stand in a European election, and indeed Her Majesty's government would have the obligation, the duty, to run one. A European election that is currently set for the 23rd of May. So using my visual aid here, I'm going to explain, working backwards from the 23rd of May, what the consequences will be. So there's our potential European election on the 23rd of May here in this country. Well, logically, there are going to have to be quite a lot of preparations for this election, and some of those fall into the time when we have definite rights as European citizens, because Article 50 process hasn't yet been extinguished. The election date is the 23rd of May. But the setting up will include things like broadcasts and policies at the Electoral Commission to do with social media and expenses and registration of political parties, and all of these matters will have to start long before the 23rd of May. This isn't a snap election like the 2017 one. This has been a long pre-planned Euro election, and if Britain participates, we need to know, really, we need to know now. We need to know immediately, so that we can properly contest them. And if there are any rulings, there will then be time to legally appeal them. Now, you might think that it doesn't take that long to set up a general election, but I suggest you'd be wrong if you felt that. So going back from the 23rd of May, the earliest point at which somebody's got the opportunity to actually vote in that election is as early potentially as the 8th of May, which is the time when postal votes will be dispatched by the town halls to the local Royal Mail. And they'll try and do that early because they'll want to make sure that if there's a dispute about a misposted postal vote that doesn't arrive, say, that there is still time in the fortnight between the 23rd and the 8th to give them the chance to send out a second, or to encourage the person with the missing postal vote to go to the actual booths. So from the 8th of May, we then have to count back, and we have to think, well, by the 8th of May, certain things have to have occurred. The one I want to focus on is going to be the election communications issued by the political parties, because that's the one with the longest lead time. So the election communications have to be, really, for a political party to stand a chance of getting those postal voters to vote for them, they have to be in the hands of the voter by the 8th of May. The postal votes distributed by the Royal Mail on the 8th, but in order to get the election communications to the voters before the 8th, the political parties, party lists, are going to have their election communications in the hands of the Royal Mail fully 2 weeks prior to that. And they've got to have them in the hands of the Royal Mail, because the Royal Mail don't guarantee to deliver unaddressed leaflets to every household in the country, which itself is no small task. It's about 11, 12 million items they've got to distribute. They've got to take about 2 weeks to do so. So that takes us back to late April. So we'll just go back a little bit here, just tear my visual aid here a little bit. So the start of the Royal Mail's fortnight is in fact the 24th. And therefore the items that are being printed are going to be printed and potentially dispatched to the Royal Mail before the close of nominations. The nominations deadline for candidates and their lists is in fact the 25th of April, which is afterwards. And there are 3 days thereafter for the electoral returning officers to then issue notices which themselves are subject to legal appeal about which nominations they've accepted and so on. In order to be able to put a political party's leaflet into the Royal Mail before the nominations have been accepted and adjudicated on, the Royal Mail themselves require a guarantee which is going to be issued by the regional returning officers to the candidates and political parties, that the Royal Mail's costs are going to be indemnified in the event that the nomination of a particular candidate, particular list, is ruled out of order. Which means in turn that the candidate declarations and the signing of those forms to the Royal Mail has to be done after something like this point, by which time the regional returning officers have to have been appointed to allow them to prepare the candidate declarations for the candidates then to be able to return them to the Royal Mail, and the Royal Mail then to process them before the nominations are actually shut. Now the nominations shut, I say, on the 25th. For most candidates they will, but that's not the latest that they can be submitted. They can be submitted and have to be ruled on as early as potentially the 12th of April. That would be, for example, in the unusual case that somebody from outside the UK wanted to stand in the Southwest Euro constituency, which includes Gibraltar, for ruling that they are a valid EU citizen and therefore can stand here in the UK. Now that ruling would have to be given by a regional returning officer. It's difficult to see that the regional returning officers couldn't be appointed any later than about the 5th of April. The run forward in order to be able to dispatch to the Royal Mail by something like the 22nd of April would be something like 2 weeks minimum just for the bundling. You see, these leaflets that I'm talking about, the 11, 12, 13 million that has to go to every single household in the country, are themselves bundled, and they have to be bundled usually by volunteers, 500 to 100 depending upon the pernickety nature of the Royal Mail officer you're delivering to, and they have to be pre-bundled and often labelled before the Royal Mail will accept them. That's the 4th of April. Now, for the regional returning officer to be able to issue the artwork certification, he still have actually got to have got the artwork together, which means that the artwork itself has got to have been approved, and that is approved by the Royal Mail. The artwork is potentially something like the 27th of March to allow printing in the early piece of April, say the first 2 weeks, bundling in the last 2 weeks in order to again get this dispatch date arriving at the voters' letterbox before the postal votes arrive. Now that in turn means that the regional postal coordinators, they're called, have got to have been appointed by the Royal Mail, which indeed means that the contract has got to have been awarded by Her Majesty's Government to the Royal Mail. And therefore it's difficult to imagine that the regional postal coordinators won't have been appointed by about the 1st or 2nd week of March at the very latest, and its contract agreed by probably the very beginning of March. All this is to say that in order to extend Article 50, in order to abrogate Article 50, and either of those would be required were we to have a people's vote, in order to do those, we have to have made an agreement to have a European election, and very quickly, because this period here, at the time that I'm recording this broadcast, is only 6 weeks away.